Today on the show, we have Dom Grounsell, who was the Chief Commercial Officer of one of the world's leading gaming companies. With an eye for detail and a nose for the numbers, he shares how you can convince any board of your strategy.
Not just kind of stand up and eloquently articulate your case. It's let's break down the story in a very structured way.
And really get your marketing to stand out from the crowd.
So what's that radically different thing? And that then becomes the conversation, not should we do something different? It's what is that different thing and how different do we want to be?
Now, also in this episode, he shares his secret top tips to career success.
Put yourself in a position to be noticed, put yourself in a position to demonstrate skills, capabilities, knowledge will always help you in the long run.
And how to crack any interview process.
You're not developing yourself to do the job that you're trying to get. You're developing yourself to pass the interview, to do the job, so that you can, to some degree, fake it till you make it, right?
Don, absolutely fabulous to have you with us.
I appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak to you both.
Yeah, no, Dom, it's an absolute pleasure.
Now, obviously, the gaming industry is fascinating for the fact that it's probably one of the most data-rich industries going. And, you know, I mean, we've talked before about the real-time odds system is a beast from a data-driven decisioning perspective. Just give us an insight about how the industry hangs together from a data point of view.
Well, data's at the core of everything that we do in betting and gaming. Not just because obviously we need to make sure, like other direct-to-consumer businesses, that we are managing spend, promotions, marketing investments in an appropriate way and driving maximum lifetime value from customers. But we also have the duality of needing to protect customers. And that is critical for us, because clearly we want to make sure that people are only using our products and services in a way that is appropriate for them and their lifestyle. And so being able to use data to understand how people are using the products, understanding their life, their context, their financial circumstances is appropriate to make sure that we serve people with the right messages or not, or that we provide the right limitations and constraints on the user experience so that people don't bet more than they should. And so it's been a really different experience of using data to ones that I've seen before. It's akin to working in a risk-based business like credit cards, where you're constantly looking at player type, player risk, as well as commercial return, but much, much more nuanced and much more expansive, because we have thousands of products and people using them in any number of ways. And so we have to be very, very careful of how we assess change in behavior in the data to be able to make sure that we can manage player behavior in real time.
Thanks for that, Dom.
Let's go back to Sean Cornwall. And you mentioned bravery. It's quite a big topic in marketing. What's the role of bravery versus hyper rational? And so I'm very interested in your perspective on the role of bravery in the craft of marketing. And you mentioned campaign for real beauty. I'm sure there were doubters to that. So tell us a bit about your perspective on bravery.
I got taught a great concept when I was young called neutral intent, which is essentially no idea is true until you can prove it. And what that took away was the need for me to feel personally convicted in any idea until I had some level of belief or some evidence to prove this was the right thing to do. And that doesn't have to be data, right? It can be any kind of reference point or proof point that gives you the idea this is the right thing for us to try. And that concept takes a lot of stress away, because for years up until the point someone told me that, I spent a lot of my time so invested in the ideas that I was presenting upwards, these campaigns, these propositions, this thing, that when it went wrong, that was a reputational damage to me and gave me, a huge amount of internal angst. Oh God, I believed in that idea and it didn't work. What does that say about me? And so for me, bravery comes from that point between I've got an idea to I'm going to go and test it. And then from testing it to scaling it, that's where bravery sits for me. And it doesn't mean about small scale incremental A/B tests where you're investing £50 in a Facebook trial. At Entain, we went from we're trying to do advertising to sell products to customers, and those adverts are being increasingly ruled against by the ASA for reasons that I could never understand, but it was the nature of the category. So if you can't do ads like that, and you want to position yourself as a business that is more accessible to a wider group of people, not just people who are betting every week on football, you have to make a step forward to becoming more of a lifestyle brand. And therefore, the only option to you is to advertise like a lifestyle brand, which requires you to make big bets on production, big bets on tonality, and really take a different path. And so what we did on the Ladbrokes brand was we went from odds offers to here's a multi-million pound production of people drumming across the UK. And we took an enormous swing. Now that wasn't bravery because I'm just going to take a punt for the sake of it. We did a lot of work behind the scenes to say, okay, if we're going to take a path to advertise like Nike or Apple or Sony, what does that mean for us? And how do we make sure that once we write that check for, several million pounds of ad production, we're doing it with the right reference points, we're doing it with the right evidential base, so I can feel confident in the bravery of signing that check, even though that might be a huge waste of money. And so it's those small points of bravery where you take a decision, and if that decision is counterintuitive to a category norm, a business norm, a management or leadership norm within the context that you operate.
Wow, Dom, that's such a wonderful example there with Ladbrokes, and it's about redefining category norms. There must have been resistance across the organization in order to sign those big checks and take those big leaps, as you say, with reference points in tow. But I wonder how you navigate, this is the classic call of change management in effect. How do you do that to get people on board in the organization to see your point of view and then get them to realize this new future?
Well, I mean, it's a classic challenge of storytelling. I'm not from not just stand up and eloquently articulate your case to an exec team or, to the department whose kind of norms you are challenging. It's one of let's break down the story in a very structured way. What's the context we're in? What's the issue we're facing? What are the options that are available? What's therefore a recommendation, and what's the implications of that recommendation? And a structured way of walking people through your thinking process to get them to the point where hopefully they say, actually, I can see where you've got to. And in the case of that Ladbrokes example, if you're in a category that's incredibly cluttered and you've got a big marketing budget, but certainly not the biggest, and where you have a need to both appeal to a wider audience who are put off by overly aggressive promotional adverts for betting companies, bombarded by them day after day, and where every time you do an ad, somebody is complaining about your ad because of a facial expression or a smile that means the ASA rules against you, which they always did, then you're in a place where you've only got one option, which is to do something radically different or come off TV, and coming off TV doesn't work. So what's that radically different thing? And that then becomes the conversation, not should we do something different? It's what is that different thing and how different do we want to be? And then you get into more, we got into more subjective matters. But what I found was once you got people to the point where they realized we had to change, then it becomes the excitement of the change. Look at this. This is the ad we're going to do. We're going to have drummers across the UK, or we're going to convince Sylvester Stallone to let us use that famous Rocky running sequence. And we're going to use world-class CGI that's never been done before to place our characters behind Rocky as he runs. And we're going to spend millions of pounds doing it. And we're all going to be proud. And actually, one of the things that happened within the organization I found most interesting was when people saw the development of the work and then the final asset was, I wouldn't know when I overplayed the value of the advertising, because there was a lot of broader work happening to change the game, and to see the output of it, to see what see the ads running and go, that's the business I work for. That reinforced a lot of the story points we've been telling through the development cycle, because suddenly they could see we were actually trying to be different, rather than saying we are going to be different and then producing creative work with a big promotional ad or an odds message on the end, which is kind of what they'd seen time and time again for years, from the very beginning of the brand.
What a lovely story arc. I can see there's something in your eyes when you talk about the ASA, so let's not dwell on that. But the excitement of change is a wonderful expression. Tell me a bit about where your value set comes from. It's clearly a very defined value set. Where do you think it comes from?
I mean, for me, it's from my upbringing. I went to kind of what you call a bog standard comprehensive, where, you know, in a lot of classes it was one book between two or one book between three, and you know, worked hard to try and overcome some of the limitations that were placed on me and the other pupils in that school because of the lack of funding that was provided, and so when I see people striving to get ahead despite the constraints that are placed on them, you know, I feel like those people deserve to be given opportunities. I also had a mum who was a very strong advocate for will versus skill. And she was a polymath. She could, you know, when I left for university, my mum decided she was going to figure out how computers worked when she was probably mid-50s. And I was doing computer studies courses at university, and she was explaining to me how to do some of the homework because she figured out, you know, at 55, how to rebuild a computer, how to configure a BIOS. And I was telling her, how have you done this? It was just through pure persistence and grit, right? I'm going to do this for myself. And so she pushed that into me and my sisters quite hard over the years. And I'm trying my best to kind of provide the same level of kind of positive impact on my child without being too much of a bully. Come on, do your homework, you know what it's like. But again, it comes back to me, like, if somebody is trying hard and they're really pushing themselves, even if they're not able to be maybe the smartest person in the room or have the best education, then it for me, I want to give those people an opportunity to prove what they can do. Because I think will often conquers skill in my experience.
Yeah, I love that thought. And my mum too, by the way, she always says to me, where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that's so important for all of us to kind of realize. So just digging a little bit deeper into that thought around the limitations that you felt you had to overcome. I mean, if you were advising people, younger people, you know, coming through at the moment who perhaps are feeling that same sense of adversity, you know, related back to Scott's video and the like, you know, what would you say are some of the key nuggets that perhaps have held you in good stead to be able to scale up through your career?
I mean, some of the lessons that I've personally been taught and learned through trial and error. I think number one, control the controllables. You know, so much of your life, particularly when you're young, doesn't feel like it's in your control, because you're impacted by external forces, whether it's your parents or the way your school is, or you know, your social circle as a child. And so for me, focusing on the things I could do myself and where I could actually deliver what I wanted to, irrespective of the context I was in. And, you know, in the case of some of the classes I mentioned, you know, if you've got one book between three, then making sure that you write down everything that's on that page before you give it to someone else. So you're not suddenly beholden on them to give it to you back. So controlling the controllables is key. I think attention to detail and really making sure that you go that kind of extra mile. That's, I think, has been something that's definitely helped me. So when you're doing a piece of work, I remember the first piece of work I did at Unilever. I mean, it was a terrible piece of work. I'm not going to lie, it was awful. I mean, I'd have to look back, it makes me cringe at some of the things I did. But it was a project to look at rate of sale analysis of toilet blocks, rim blocks, bleachers for household care. Not the most glamorous thing I've ever done in my life. But I kind of took that brief, and it was like, do a bit of analysis. I think I had 1,000 pages of PowerPoint. In the end, looking at each of the top 10 retailers and going through in detail, massively expanded the brief, wasted a lot of time. But the point was, I want to really get into the detail to show you what I can do. And whilst it wasn't a great piece of work, I think the effort reflected well. And then I think the final piece I'd say is put your hand up. You know, some of the things that helped me at the start of my career were all about volunteering, being seen to be willing. And I remember there was a great thing I did once. I was asked to do an extracurricular project with a guy who was creating artworks that represented the brands that Unilever had, the home and personal care brands. We had a fashion designer doing Persol. We had a videographer doing Lynx, I think it was. So we were going to do what was essentially an art exhibition in the ground floor of the office. We did that for 6 months. It was a hell of a lot of additional work. And then now Fitzgerald, the CEO, was coming to kind of do a visit, and we were asked to walk him around. But as it turned out, the guy who ran the project, who was more senior than me, he left. So as a grad, I got an hour walking now Fitzgerald around an art exhibition. And that was purely came from putting my hand up and saying, yeah, I'll do this extracurricular thing. And so the indirect benefits, the intangible benefits you get from volunteering for things that may on the surface not look like a great use of your time can sometimes end up being hugely valuable and beneficial to your career, reputationally and from a skill set point of view. And so I would always say, no matter what it is, put your hand up.
Love that. Some great lessons, not least putting your hand up. Often people say, why me? Well, actually, why the hell not you?
Exactly. I mean, that couldn't have put it better myself. Why not me? Put yourself in a position to be noticed, put yourself in a position to demonstrate the skills, capabilities, knowledge, and I think it will always help you in the long run.
For sure.
But Dom, just to jump in there for a second, as part of that thought, how would you advise somebody to convince people like recruiters or potential line managers about cross-transferable skills? Because often that's where the crux happens. In fact, there was a mentoring session last week, and I was exactly to that point about, well, actually, it's almost impossible to go from one to the other because you don't get the buy-in of recruiters or the establishment that you can transfer those skills. But you've done that really effectively. So what's your take?
I suppose so. I look at interview preparation as a key skill. I mean, I always tell people I mentor, you're not developing yourself to do the job that you're trying to get. You're developing yourself to pass the interview to do the job, because it's the 30% stretch when you're on the ground that is the thing that's going to be the developmental part of the role, right? And if you're stepping up into a bigger role or stepping into a new industry, there's always going to be a stretch. So just be comfortable with that. And if your stretch is category experience, then prepare for that, right? Do the research, go online, immerse yourself in as much information you can about the category, the brands, the customer behaviors and attitudes, so that you can, to some degree, fake it till you make it, right? But in terms of our experiences as marketers or business leaders, being able to explain how you have solved a problem, how you've written a strategy, how you've approached a challenge in dealing with a difficult individual or developing a team or leading a department, all those things are common no matter what industry you're in. So really, if you believe your gap in any interview situation is knowledge about the industry, learn about that. So when you're asked about it, you can sound credible and authoritative. And hopefully your success in the core competencies and skills of marketing, leadership, and management will shine through, and you can convince them that you can then close whatever category specific knowledge or experience gaps you may have. You can close those on the job. And to give you a real life example, I ran a P&L such as you do when you're in FMCG when I was very young, and then I had no P&L management experience till I went to TravelX. And in that intervening period, I had many conversations with recruiters about wanting to be a P&L owner, and them say, well, P&L owners don't often come from marketing outside of FMCG. It's not going to be easy. And when I was given the opportunity to interview for a role at TravelX, I had a big marketing component, but also a P&L component. I'm not ashamed to say I watched a lot of YouTube videos, Money Week videos about what is a P&L, what's a balance sheet, all those things. So when I was asked to talk about commercial management, P&L management, I could talk about it authoritatively from a position of knowledge despite having not done it for a long time. And so, again, it sounds a bit cliche, but you've got to be able to fake it till you make it.
Maybe I want to pick up on this and think about, well, why did you mention that you haven't had many Zigs. And I wonder if Zigs actually are important to have in a career as opposed to being more linear and traditional in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point to me is just more. I've tended to stick to large company, large corporate life. I never had the bravery to start my own thing. I never had a good enough idea, and that's a regret for me that I didn't try harder to come up with with a business concept that I could take forward, that I could be really passionate in. I regretted that. But I would say, Richie, where I have zigged, like moving to kind of be an MD of a small insurance company as opposed to continuing on a CMO track, moving here, moving between industries, I do think variety has been important for my career development. I've never been the kind of person who's wants to move from one business to a competitor. Something about the way that you are socialized in FMCG, I feel, at least for me, made me very passionate about the company and the brands I work for when I'm in them. When I was at Unilever, we used to go and face up all of the dog shampoo, push the Pantene back, on the shelf, all those things. Doing ads in telco where you're actively rubbishing the competition because that's the way it was at that point. You were a bit Wild West. Going from one business to another business that was directly competitive never sat right with me. And so moving to different categories always seemed like a better option. And actually, not only does it I think it's given me quite a broad view of how different industries and businesses work, but it's also proven to me that time after time, skills are eminently transferable. Experience is eminently transferable. And what I'd say to any marketer going through their career is, there is nothing to be scared of moving from industry to industry. Your skills will be valid. Your opinions will be heard. You have to learn about the category, but it's always just about people. And people's free usage of a product might differ from one category to another, but we're talking to consumers. And remembering that is the thing that will help you, no matter what it is you're selling, jumping from bleachers to telco, from telco to cards, from cards to insurance, from insurance to gambling. Those leaps are easy to make when you remember that the skills and the consumer insights remain the same.
I'm going to pick up on something a little bit different here. About a week or two ago, you posted something, the recent talk by Scott Galloway, and it was in and all around what we're doing to our kids. And in fact, the premise of the talk is around how do we actually love our kids and the like. And I by the way, on the back of what you posted, I then watched that talk, and I was fascinated by it. I thought it was really, really insightful. And I just wanted to get your take on that. And maybe for the audience, it was in and around some of the trials, tribulations that young people are going through today in modern day America, which is very, very relevant for the UK context too. Whether that goes to, the barriers faced around education or economic growth that young people are facing and kind of being clubbed out. And I thought I'd get your take on that. What did you think?
I mean, I find everything Scott Galloway does eminently fascinating because he's just got one of the planet-sized brains that, whether it's his books or the things he does on TED, or indeed, the fact he's a regular commentator on CNN, I'm just glued to everything that he does because I find him both inspirational and informative at the same time. My take on what he was talking about was, the root of this is inequality. The ability for people to realize the potential, the ability for people to move up through their lives in the way that they would like to. And in respect to the youth of America, the economic barriers that are standing in people's way, whether that, to your point, Richie, they're linked to the ability to get a leading edge education, or whether it's the ability to get on the home ownership ladder. Those issues are not obviously limited to the US. They're seen right across the world as kind of young people are increasingly looking at their parents and their grandparents and trying to understand why maybe their lives aren't as rich, or they don't have as many opportunities. And one of the interesting things is when you look at the data, clearly there are a lot of opportunities out there that our parents didn't have, but the perception is that somehow there are limitations in place. And one of the things obviously it makes me think is, what is the role that we can play as leaders to provide those opportunities? And as you and I have discussed couple of times, Richie, I really feel like there's a need for greater social mobility for people who don't come through the traditional educational background into the corporate world, into marketing, because there's a lot of potential out there that you can't find if you're looking for kind of a cookie cutter set of either experiences, degree characteristics, or extracurricular activities that people can only get if they are lucky enough to have gone through a middle class or upper class education, or had parents who are necessarily around and there to help them and kind of guide them through that journey. I think there's a lot of wasted potential in a lot of countries. And I think it's our obligation to try and realize that potential as best we can.
We're coming to the end of the segment, Dom, so I'm going to pitch up the last question here. And of course, probably no small one. But you talked about at the beginnings of your career, obviously wanting to be an actor and then thereafter making other decisions. But the embryonic motivation for both acting and marketing was to make a footprint on history. Now, I wonder how the perspective on how you actually achieve that and what it means to make that footprint has evolved over time. And I wondered if you could talk to that.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely evolved. I mean, the kind of the grandiose visions I had of changing the world when I was starting out, they've certainly evolved and probably modified. My focus, certainly as I've got older and probably more jaded, is how do you improve the business that you're in? How do you improve the lives of the people who are working with you and for you? And how do you improve the practices of the business that you're in, not just so they can be more successful and deliver more revenue and profit, but hopefully deliver better to customers. And that's become more of the kind of a narrower focus. That's something I think, to my earlier point, controlling the controllables. Most of us won't work in a company that changes an industry or changes the world for the better, as much as we may aspire to. And so, or what we can do is try and make things incrementally better in the context that we operate. And that's probably where my vision's gone. It's come down a bit to something more manageable, but I think ultimately the satisfaction that I draw from seeing us do something that consumers love, or seeing people move forward in their career, develop, is well worth getting out of bed for every day, even if I'm not going to do a Steve Jobs, which maybe at the beginning of my career I hoped I was going to do. And so it's a narrower focus, but I think one that's evidently more within my grasp and one that I derive a huge amount of satisfaction from.
Dom, that just sounds ace, and you certainly don't come across as jaded. It just seems a little bit more pointed, right, in and around how exactly we're going to all make that impact. And it's funny because we, I suspect, all have that realization at different points in our journey about the way and where we are going to make that little dent, to leave that legacy or footprint, as you call it. It's been a wonderful conversation. And like I say, not jaded at all, but you've made a massive dent already. And I'm sure you're going to go on to do fantastic things in the months ahead. And really look forward to watching the space with anticipation. Thank you, Dom.